Okay, next is data labeling, handling, and disposal. And when we talk about data labeling, it basically is letting us know that we are kind of covering that we need to have proper cataloging, retention, and retrieval policies, right? So data may need to be kept, depending on what it is, for very long periods of time. So we may have some data that needs to remain on site for 3 months, some for 3 years, some for 7 years, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so if we have all of this data, whether it's stored on tapes or maybe even digitally on a virtual tape library, things along these lines. If it's not labeled correctly, especially if it's taken off site, like on tape as an example, if we don't have those labeled properly, and then we try to go back and actually recover any of that, it's going to be very difficult. All right, so we also have to understand that once we have data that goes off site, we put it on tape or whatever, that data is now a potential for exposure and a potential for a breach. So that's where our handling and disposal needs to come into play as well. We need to have specific guidelines around how that data is taken off site, who has access to it, how long it's retained, things along those lines. Make sure that the third-party company, if we're in fact using a third-party company, maintains very stringent guidelines on who can access the data. And then when we're talking about disposal, we need to make sure that it's destroyed in a fashion that is consistent with the type of data and the level of access or the level of confidentiality that it needs. So in other words, if it is top secret data, that may need to be wiped 35 pass wiping as an example, versus just deleting the data. Or if it's a storage array, we may need to have a third party come in, maybe the storage array vendor actually come in and wipe that storage array, kind of a quote unquote forensic process, a forensic wiping, so that data is unretrievable under any circumstance. If it's on storage tapes, we may need to have a third party company come in and actually run those tapes through a shredder, and at the end they'll give us some type of certification or a certificate saying that this data was in fact destroyed properly. All right, so we need to make sure that we retain that documentation as well. All of this comes into play because sensitive data can be compromised, and once it's gone, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to get back. All right, so that's why I say shredded versus thrown in the trash, wiped versus deleted, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, we have to make sure we're following those processes.